Welcome to a special idea scaling episode of the Idea Climbing Podcast. Today, we're discussing how to create and scale your own networking group with my guest, Clay Hicks. Clay is a serial entrepreneur with a portfolio of 5 different companies, an author, a speaker, and trainer on professional relationships. Clay founded his first company, H7 Network, in 2008 in the hopes of positively impacting the many underserved entrepreneurs and all sales professionals. We dive into topics such as how to create engagement and collaboration in your meetings, how to build relationships to scale when your group hits critical mass, advice for building and scaling your group through virtual meetings, and more golden nuggets of advice. You're going to love this show. Clay, thank you for being here for the Idea Scaling Podcast. I really appreciate you making the time for this.
My pleasure, man. Anything you're doing, I want to do with you.
Thank you. And we're going to be talking about creating and then scaling your own mastermind group. Before we get into the strategies, the tactics, the tips, what's your story? We'll talk a little bit about H7 too, but as far as starting a networking group, you got to start somewhere. What's your story? Why did you start one to begin with?
To start with, I was in search of a networking group way back in the day. Where I was searching for a networking group. And honestly, I left more disappointed than anything else. A lot of it had to do with like how much money are you making and how many referrals, blah, 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 all this stuff. And then some of the experience wasn't great for me. So when I started up, I surrounded myself with 5 leaders to help me to start it up. And so when I started that up, they helped, and we framed out our first style of networking group, which was basically 60-second commercials and a speaker, and that's kind of a way we went. And then I, of course, built more relationships and things, and that changed everything as well.
So I think that's important to have that support group. How did you first choose who you were going to reach out to? And then how did you get them enrolled to help you build H7? What did you do for those first 5, picking them and then getting them enrolled?
So as a leader myself, I'm always on the look. Now, of course, that was 17 years ago too. So back then I wasn't quite the leader I am today, but back then or even now, I always look for potential in other people, right? I don't see them just for who they are. I see them for who they are and who they could be in a relationship with myself, or how valuable having that relationship would be. And so when I went to make those choices, the folks that were on my board, I'd rather not say their names, but nonetheless, I had a decent relationship with them to begin with. And that would have been my early days of my connect, serve, and ask methodology coming out. And inviting them to help me, asking them for help, knowing that I cannot do all of this, and knowing still today I could not do it without the help of others.
So how did you get, as far as attendance goes, what did you do in the beginning to get people into the room with you as far as attendees?
Yeah, so we kind of went our separate ways, like myself and the board. And I had a network from my real estate days at that time. And so I started there. So I invited the people that I already at least had a connection with back then, told them what I was doing. I'm also a natural promoter, of course. Yeah. And so encouraging people to attend something, things like that. But I had a list of my real estate relationships at that time. Mm-hmm. And so then they also had relationships with other people, connections. And we just kind of all decided, let's go our separate ways and begin inviting people to the meeting.
So how did you get traction in the early days? What did you do, the first meeting, 5th meeting, 10th meeting? What did you do to get traction? Because I know people can get excited about something at first and then it wanes. What did you do initially to get that traction going?
Actually, we started free. So we started free. We did free. So we started in April. Like we started forming the company in March. But anyway, we launched our first meeting around April 1st. Well, by June 1st, at that point, it was all free. 90 days, come as you go, come. We only had a couple meetings right then. So people were, coming, and it was free. And then they had to buy lunch and things, but it was free. So the traction was around, getting butts in the seat and not focusing on making sure everybody paid just to be there, but bringing people around us, right? Bringing people around us, bring them into our circle of what we were about to do.
So once you got them in the room in the early days, you mentioned it a little bit, but could you unpack what was the structure of the meetings? How
Yeah.
did you make it interesting and valuable?
Well, back then it was starting. So we started with a form of celebrations that we have today.
Mhm.
Then I would do some kind of value add to everybody. I would give them some value around how to network, things like that, how I network, things like that. And then we would do 60-second commercials. That was pretty much it, right? We did commercials and we encouraged them to do one-to-ones. That was my very first kind of framework of a meeting style back then.
So how did it grow? When did it start to change and alter a little bit?
So effective July 1st, we began to charge. When we began to charge, people began to see it as more valuable. Okay. So we grew by 60 members in our first 6 months.
60 or 16?
60.
Okay.
60. 60. So from July 1st to December 31st, we grew by 60 members total.
So once the board disbanded, what did you do for support? Once you hit 60 members, what did your support system look like at that point?
Actually, they stayed with me. They stayed with me for another couple of years, actually. And then the only reason they left back then was change of jobs and things. So there was no animosity, there was no negativity, there was no quitting. Just life was in the way. It was back then. It was 2008, 2009, 2010, right? And so there was a lot of transition going on with the recession that was going on. Now, one gentleman that was on the board, he lasted until last year.
Wow.
He was with me until November of last year. So that's 16 years later. So.
Wow. With everything you learned, what suggestions with what we're talking about now, and especially in hindsight of 15, 16 years now, if someone's looking to start their own group, okay, get some support, even if it's an informal board of advisors, so you're not climbing a mountain alone, you're not the lone wolf.
Yeah.
As far as creating a structure that's different than just throwing 200 people in a room for open networking, or just everyone go around and give the commercial. Someone watching or listening right now, what advice would you have for structure of early day meetings when they're getting started?
Well, the first step would be to make sure you surround yourself with strong relationships. Okay. Lone wolf to pack, one may say. So if there's the African proverb, right? You can go fast by yourself, or you can alone, or you can go further with people. But I may be saying that wrong. I'm saying that wrong. But nonetheless, the relationships are the key. So if you just think to yourself, I'm going to start up a group and then everybody's going to show, I would highly recommend you take a step back and check yourself. Do I have relationships first that are going to actually help me with this? And then as I began to do it, getting feedback from them that they believe that this could be better. So being open to actual constructive conversation or criticism or whatever around, what do they think? You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. And the day you are is the day you better change your room. So that'd be my advice.
So as far as continuing on that thought, as far as the actual meetings go, what would you suggest in lieu of, okay, everyone give their, everyone gives an elevator pitch and you hope for the best. What would you suggest people do differently than what everyone else is already doing?
Well, the traditional networking style is going to be your 30, 60 second, 30 or 60 second commercial, a speaker, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I would concentrate on engagement. So think about your meeting style and how engaging between the singular or the individual who shows up and what happens throughout that hour. Take a step back and think about how that will affect the individual in the room. So think about it. Really comes down to my favorite quote: when you focus on relationships and not the outcome becomes more predictable. Same concept. When you focus on the actual individuals that will be in the room, what is it that they want? What is it that will move their needle? not what moves yours.
You
Not
and
what
I
moves
have,
yours.
no, go on.
No, that's it.
And you and I have talked about this, and I love with that quote you just said, I'd love you to unpack a little bit more the predictable engagement or predictable outcomes. Can you speak more? What do you mean by that? Because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. So first of all, it's one of my favorite quotes because it goes along with focusing on the relationship, like the building of the trust with the individual. Like they're a human being, so treat them as such, and try not to get caught up in what is the outcome I'm looking to achieve for myself, right? And so what I mean in this phrase, in that quote, as it pertains to what we're talking about, is focus on what is it that will support the individual in the room in being able to engage with the other people in the room. I'm sorry, but a 30 to 60-second commercial doesn't help with engagement. It just introduces yourself so people know who they're talking to. I would concentrate on true collaboration in the meeting. Concentrate on thinking about how, if this person connects with that person, how would they connect, and engineer pieces or parts of the whole of the meeting style that empower them to have success would be what I would say.
So, what are some examples? That's pretty interesting. What are some examples of creating engagement there?
An example of putting them into groups. I mean, as simple as that. Not making them just stay external the entire time. Put them into groups and let them talk. Let them get to know each other. Don't just simply expect them to have success because they're in your presence. You have to think about it from what their perspective is. So, the more engagement they have with those in the room, the better. So, I would suggest some kind of small group breakout of some sort to allow them to be empowered to connect with one another in some way.
So once you hit 60, what does the next stage of your evolution look like? You got your footing, you have your support system, you got some traction. What happened next after you hit that 60 point?
So I will tell you, we doubled in size again we doubled in size. So we have 150 members the next year. So with that being said, so I wanted that small group breakout experience for our members for what's going on in H7. So I actually tried engineering that to happen. And what do you know? A relationship of mine, still friends today, still a member today, comes up and says, "Hey, I think you can do better at this. Are you willing to hear what I have to say?" And I did. And the small group breakouts were born in our meeting style. And so again, you go back to relationships first, right? So a relationship feels confident enough to come up to me and say, "Hey, yeah, I know what I can see what you might be trying to do, but you're not doing it well." So
Mhm.
this is how maybe to make that improvement or whatever. So it still comes back to relationships and listening and not knowing everything and being willing to try new things that support that success.
Well, on that note, what once you hit that you double in size again, how did your support system change or did you add people? What did it look like? Okay, because getting the first 10, 100, whatever it might be, that's one thing.
Yeah.
Doubling in size again, I'm imagining the support system did not look the same as it did on day one. What did it look like? What did you do?
So you're right. So I was getting squeezed, right? Getting squeezed because of time. And so the next part is because I'm getting squeezed, how do we scale? How do we scale this thing? And so back around 2012, yes, 2012, we had our very first alpha teams. Alpha teams are leaders that lead all the groups. My first team had 8 on it. In the beginning, just trying it, getting their feedback. But that was the next iteration where we created leadership teams that run all the meetings. And that began at that moment for scalability purposes.
Talk more about that. How did you, same thing as far as initially, once you've grown to a certain point and you want to create alpha teams, how do you approach people to take on a role like that? How do you pick them? How do you approach alpha team leaders?
Well, that would come down to, your relationships.
Mhm.
So, like that invitation, like asking them, inviting them to participate is how I did it. Hey guys, here's my idea. Would you be open to helping me with it? Right. And so that's how that began. And they're like, oh, yeah, we want to do it. They want, oh, yeah. I mean, 8 people right then and there in that same meeting stayed after the meeting. So I said it out loud, and then boom, all those people stayed because I'm not doing this by myself, and I don't want
No.
to.
So what did the next level look like? You've grown, you've got the alpha teams in place. Then what did you do?
Well, then as we expect directors, we needed leaders for metro areas and such, right? So we moved up and said, okay, well now we need leaders that run that serve the leaders, right? That help us grow, that help us do things. So the next level was directors. Now that was, that was 2012, 13. It was back then, finding people that would help me to actually scale it and to grow it. And so yeah, I mean, we have 15 today, right now, currently, they do that
15 directors?
right now. Yeah, they do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what's next? As far as you got the directors in place, you've got the alpha teams in place. Either what did you do to get from 2000? Yeah, that's a better question. What did you do to get from 2012 and what we'll say before the implosion of 2020? What was 2012 to 2020 like for you?
It was all about scaling. So think about from 12 to 20. By the time we got to 20, we had directors in Columbus, Indianapolis, Dayton, Cincinnati, Austin, Texas, and North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina. That's what it looked like. And we met in person. Our meetings back then were in person before the pandemic. So making sure that the directors knew what to do, having manuals, instructions, how to do everything, training, all that stuff was all being built. And at the same time, we ended up developing and becoming a franchisor via documentation only. So we didn't do anything else. So we built it all out, all the manuals, all that stuff had to all be built so that we could scale, so that we were serving our relationships so that we could scale.
Well, then 2020 hits, the world goes to hell. Let's move past that. It was what it was. But what you've done successfully, and I've seen a few other groups that did it, but more implosions than successes. And now in this day and age, people watching might think, well, I want to do virtual. What advice do you have for building and scaling in the virtual space like you had to do so desperately at that point?
Yeah, so I'd already I'd already had the framing for all the leadership. So then it became during the pandemic, it was scramble, 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 grow, 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 do the thing, all the stuff. And so I had to rely heavily, even more heavily on relationships. I had to bring in outside consulting to help me to reestablish operations in our systems. Like before we went to the pandemic, we had 5 on our staff, excuse me. So now it's 20, right?
Well,
And so to go like that took very good relationships, smarter than me, that helped support us to go to this level, to be able to spread out. Now we have groups in 15 states
wow.
and in another country. We're getting ready to open up in 2 more countries and all that stuff. So that's attributed to our processes, our methodology, our relationships, and our go-to-market strategy too.
So based on your experience now doing this successfully, what structure would you suggest for people watching as far as for a virtual event structure? Once again, beyond 30 people in a room, 30-second elevator pitches, okay, bye-bye. What structure would you suggest for virtual events to make them successful and engaging?
I would suggest the having good, I would recommend that you really seriously think about putting them into groups to have conversation. Okay, that is going to help with engagement big time. People are not going to sign up necessarily to come onto a meeting for an hour and 60 minutes where everybody just does commercials and there's a speaker. Like it's just that's much more difficult over Zoom, as hard as it is in person, right? It's even more difficult in Zoom. So in the virtual world, concentrate heavily on engagement, period. As much engagement as possible. So from the beginning to the end, watch your steps throughout that engineered system that you are actually deploying to ensure that they have time to talk, they have time to connect, and there's plenty of engagement opportunities aside from just a commercial.
So on that note, what would you share? What are your steps?
Sure. So we celebrate, right? We start off our meetings with celebrations. We do these funky introductions that are nowhere near being done anywhere else in the world that we can find out, which is our 3-word introductions. And then next, we break into groups led by facilitators. And inside these groups, a facilitator walks you through for about 25 to 30 minutes a business building activity. So in this business building activity, they do their 30-second commercials there. They answer a question about their business that helps everybody else kind of get to know them better. And then we're going to find out who you're looking to meet. And we're going to do that work right then and there in the meeting. And then after that's over, when we come back, if somebody did not get that connection they were looking for, not to worry, we'll put it out to the rest of the crowd. We go for 100% tie the bow every single time.
That is awesome. And I experience that week after week on the hub where I'm on the alpha team, so I get to experience that.
Yeah.
We have covered a lot of ground in a very short period of time. If someone's, let's say, new or newish, like maybe they're either thinking of seriously considering it, contemplating starting a group, or they have a little bit of traction here and there. If you were to say, you know what, at least do this one thing above all else, at least do this to get traction and get rolling so you can scale, what would you tell those new or newish people to do above all else?
Make sure that the people in the room have a place to connect. That's what I would be sure of. Make sure that they have an opportunity to break into groups to be able to connect, at the very least, at the very minimum.
Thank you very much, Clay. This has been great. If people want to find you online, what place or places should they go to?
You can find me, of course, our website, e7network.com. You can find me on LinkedIn underneath Clay Hicks. And for those of you who are listening, I actually mentor other networking group owners too. I have no problems with that. Can reach out to me. You want me to hear what you got? You want me to hear your engagement? Happy to listen. Happy to support you in any way I can. So
thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
And scene.